And my client had married a woman after he was on death row, and she had an open casket at his funeral that the only people who were at were me, another lawyer on my team, this woman, and a cousin of the guy who had been executed. She told me that the reason that she wanted to have this service was because she wanted an opportunity to touch him, because she'd been married to him for 11 years and had never touched him. So in a way, Spencer, that encapsulates my answer to your question, which is that you get to know these people.
Okay. I have a friend of mine that has a very weird job, and their job is embalming dead bodies. And I couldn't think of anything worse personally, but she thinks it's an incredibly good thing and positive thing to do to help people that have lost their loved ones, present their dead body in the nicest possible way, embalming, dressing, makeup and all that kind of stuff. And so she thinks she's doing something really positive, but I could never get my head around it. Because of TV and movies, your job or your career, it's kind of sexy, isn't it, to the outside world? It's kind of sexy to be that kind of criminal lawyer that's fighting for justice and stuff like that. But I'm 100% sure you'll be able to confirm this. This must take a massive toll on your emotions when you work so closely with somebody and you know and you're fighting for them and you don't win. Can you give me some examples or just tell me about how that kind of stuff feels for you?
First, can I start with your embalming story, because yeah, sure. I think that it reminded me of something that I wanted to tell you that I think you'll be interested in, and I hope your listeners are interested in as well. When people get sent to death row in Texas, they no longer ever have what are called contact visits with anybody. They can visit people if the people are approved to visit them, and obviously including their lawyers, but they're behind glass, and so they can't touch them. And so unless they're being examined by a doctor in what's called a contact visit room, a psychologist or something like that, where their lawyer will also be, or unless they have a court hearing where I'm able to sit next to him and put my arm around his shoulders, from the time that he arrives on death row until the time that he's executed, the only people who touch him are prison guards. And I don't think that your typical human being thinks very much about what it's like to not touch people anymore. I think probably because of COVID and the fact that people are staying home, people have a better sense of it now than they did maybe a year ago. But so much of human interaction is touching, from shaking hands, which is very formal, to just putting your arm around somebody, to hugging a friend of yours. And these inmates don't get that anymore. And I had a client 15 years ago or so, and he had married a woman after he had already arrived on death row. This is a different phenomenon that maybe we'll talk about later on. It happens more often than you would think. And my client had married a woman after he was on death row. She was European. She was living in Germany at the time, and she would come over to the States 4 or 6 times a year and rent a little hotel room where death row is and go see him 3 consecutive days for the maximum amount of hours that she was allowed to see him, which at that time was 4 hours per day. And when he finally got executed, she had him recovered by the funeral home. She had him embalmed, and she had an open casket at his funeral that the only people who were at were me, another lawyer on my team, this woman, and a cousin of the guy who'd been executed. And she told me that the reason that she wanted to have this service, even though there wasn't really even anybody who would be going to the service, was because she wanted an opportunity to touch him, because she'd been married to him for 11 years and had never touched him. So in a way, Spencer, that encapsulates my answer to your question, which is that you get to know these people. I mean, I represent my clients anywhere from 6 or 8 months to, I think the longest guy I represented for over 11 years. And so you know these people really well. I sometimes tell my wife that I know my clients better than I know her, because part of our work involves constructing a family tree for our clients that we like to go back 3 generations, and then interviewing everybody on the tree, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, friends, every teacher, every prison guard, everybody who my client has ever known, I want to go talk to, because I'm just trying to learn everything I can in order to explain how this person who came into the world the same way we did is somebody who one day kills somebody. How does that happen? And so you just know these people, I want to say intimately. I mean, you know them intimately. And so when the person finally gets executed, you're not just losing a client, you're losing somebody that you have a really deep and meaningful human relationship with. And it used to be very, very hard for me. I think that it's less hard now, not so much because I've gotten used to it. You don't get used to it, but I've been married now for 24 years, and so my wife is quite a pillar, and we have a son, and he's 20, and he's quite a pillar. I've had people who I hire after they have maybe worked for me as an intern for 2 years, and then they graduate from law school and they want to keep doing death penalty work, and I hire them. And the morning after our first execution, they come into my office and they quit. And it's because when they're working on the cases as a student, it's just one of several things that they're doing. They do their homework assignment for class, and then they spend some time working on the case, and they're sad when the client gets executed, but it's not something that represents a colossal failure. And then they come to work for me, and it's all they're doing. All they're doing is trying to keep this person alive. And then you don't. And I've literally had 3 people who the very day after the first execution that they worked on come into my office and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. And it's because you don't know, even if you've worked on these cases as a student, even if you've worked on them as an intern, you just don't know how you're going to react when it's actually your full-time job, when it's the only thing you're doing, and your client, your friend, this person who you know, whose family you know, is executed. I've stood next to mothers and wives and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters during executions, and stood next to them as they're watching their family member get executed, still unable to touch the person, still unable to comfort the person.
Is it like we see in the movies? Does it happen like that? How does it happen?
Yeah, it is, I think, part of the mythology of the way the death penalty works. Is there's 2 major pieces to the mythology, in my view, that prop it up. One piece is that every part of the system gets to deflect responsibility to some other part of the system. So if you're a juror, you can say, I'm just 1 of 12 people, and there's going to be these judges behind me. If you're the trial judge, you say, oh, there's the appellate court judges. If you're the prison warden who's got to carry out the execution, you say, some judge has ordered me to do this. Everybody is in a position where they can deflect the weight of the moral responsibility to somebody else. And I think that's one part of the reason that the system survives. The other part is because the violence of it, and I don't use the word violence lightly, this is the state that is putting to death a human being, not on the battlefield, not in the heat of the moment in a police shootout. It's an orchestrated act that's choreographed and practiced, and a person who is, at the moment that he is executed, harmless. He's lashed down to a gurney, is executed. It's a violent act, and yet that violence is very well disguised by the manner of death. I don't know if they have it on TV anymore. They used to have on TV. I used to amuse myself late at night when I couldn't sleep by watching something called the medical channel. And the medical channel was this channel where they would show surgeons performing surgeries. So you could watch somebody do a what do you call it? A coronary bypass. You could watch somebody do a hip replacement. And when you watch an execution, that's what it reminds me of. The curtain opens and the inmate is tied down with thick leather straps to what is effectively a gurney, and has IV lines in both arms, one primary set and then a redundant set in case something goes wrong with the first one. It's covered with a sheet, and the warden gives a signal to the people who start the flow of chemicals running, but there's nothing dramatic about it. It's not like a gun goes off or a bell is rung or anything like that. The warden communicates silently to these executioners who are in another room who you can't see, and they push a button, and then the machine pushes the plunger down into the syringe, and so you start administration of the drug, and it's a barbiturate, and so it makes the person go to sleep. And so when you witness an execution, you are witnessing something that looks very much like somebody falling asleep in the next room. Person closes his eyes, might snore a little bit, might gurgle a little bit, the way people sometimes make noises when they're sleeping. And then there's stillness. And then you stand there for some number of minutes, and then the warden makes a signal to a doctor who comes into the room, who listens for a pulse, who checks to see if the pupils will dilate, and then if there are no signs of life, declares the time of death. It's not like watching somebody die in a firing squad, which is violent, visibly violent, or watching somebody die in an electric chair where the body convulses, or die in a gas chamber where the body convulses. It's like watching somebody go to sleep before a surgical procedure. And I think that part of the reason that the punishment continues to be used in the United States is because the death penalty jurisdictions in the United States have so successfully masked the violence of what this procedure is.
If you want to see other episodes, then you know what to do. Click over there. But if you want to subscribe, click over there. Guess what? You get all the episodes. They come through to you whenever you want to. Do the right thing.